Hello and welcome back to the EF5 podcast, the crossroads between logistics and life. And today, what we're going to talk about is basically what it means when your package is, delayed a little bit, or when you just straight up don't get your package at all, and it says that it's in a totally different state, or sometimes depending on
different
where you get
country.
it from. Different country, yeah, which is more frequent than a lot of people probably realize. What does that look like in the freight industry? There's like a term for it, right? Like short on air cargo or something like that, or
General term is a OS&D, overage, shortage, damage.
okay,
So it kind of lumps it all together.
right?
But in theory, you're basically short if you're missing something.
Okay,
Obviously, if it's damaged, then you have damages.
right?
Rarely do you have overage.
Yeah, no one
But
wants to send too much, I'm sure.
correct.
Okay,
So that's the general term along the way. Is OS&D is kind of where it's boxed into. And what you're bringing up more so that we're going to talk about is an understanding of like how's that possible?
Mhm.
Like why did one side say it's all there and the other side said, hey, it's not there?
right.
And then how come we don't all know that
Mhm.
in the middle?
Now, why is that? Like, I guess let's start from square one. At the very beginning, let's say it starts at this whatever warehouse, right?
Right.
To go from point A to point B, the next warehouse, if it starts with having all of it and then some of it missing, how does that happen in between?
Well, in this context, we're talking about air cargo more so than anything, and specifically to imports. So things coming from another country into the U.S. So there's many layers of the supply chain that goes on from the time it's made to end user.
Right.
So along that way, narrow that down to, okay, it's a finished product being sold and it's ready to ship. So kind of we're going to talk in that narrow box.
Okay.
And from an air freight side, it has to be handed to the airline at some form or fashion, no matter who's involved with it to that point.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, Delta Airlines we'll use, for example, they have to take possession of it. So let's use this analogy that whoever gave it to Delta gave it in a loose capacity, meaning they're not on a PMC or a built-up unit. So we've all seen the military drop supplies and it parachutes out the back of the plane. Well, with that's basically a PMC. That's a built-up unit.
Okay.
So it's intact, all one piece, so it's not flying around with like stuff does in your back seat.
Right.
So it's all compressed into a unit. Well, at that point, you may have multiple shipments on there. So Nike sends something, I don't know, Verizon buys something, and Apple. So you have various styles of freight all stacked into that one unit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that process is happening at the airline. You have somebody physically stacking, building, tying down the nets, doing everything. So they're loading the cargo on there.
Right.
And they're taking a manifest of all the different cargo.
Right.
So it goes to the flight line to be put on the plane. Let's say it's a hazardous material. Or let's say it's not hazardous. It could be just general cargo, whatever elements you want to talk about. Well, the pilot has the last say-so, so to speak, of what he wants to fly with. So it could be the pilot wants it off because there's too much weight on the plane. I'm just giving like a handful of examples
Right.
of why something could be removed from the plane. It could be piloted. It could be style product can't ship with other style product because together they cause a crazy explosion, whatever the
Right.
elements are. And we got many examples over the years of planes going down, and then they come to find out what was on there, and it was too much quantity, or maybe it was too heavy and it couldn't get off the runway.
Right.
So all those things are accounted for at the loading side. And then you have just general human error. Me and you are putting boxes on this table, and we forgot there was one under the table to grab, and we turn and walk away. Things happen, and then we realize we said it was all there, but we forgot that one piece that we put out of our way, and then all of a sudden we find out later. So all those elements lead into the shipping of it, and then we're taking a plane, let's say flying from London to Atlanta. Well, that's roughly a 6-hour flight.
Okay.
So people who ship air cargo, it's like your UPS next day, like they want it right away. So they're paying a premium rate to get it right away.
Okay.
So everything's happening in a quick time process. So let's say we're the loader. We put the stuff on there. The pilot says it's good. We left the box under the table. We're going home that night. We come in the next morning. We see, oh, man, we left the box. But we told everybody all the boxes were there.
Right.
So then as it's tracking through the process, it appears to be everything's there.
Okay.
Flight lands 6 hours later. I'm still at home sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
The guys here have to unload the flight. They're told all this stuff is there. Then they have to check to make sure it's there. Well, the carrier may be at Delta here in Atlanta already picking up that freight before the guys in London realize there's something left behind.
Right.
So then in the middle, the forwarder's saying, hey, it should be there tomorrow. Go get it. It's ready to go.
Okay.
They can see it was supposed to be there. They go to bed. We're there before they wake up, and then we realize not all of it's there.
Right.
Then you have the element of if the airline pilot says, hey, I want it off. He pulls it off, weight and balance on the plane. Nobody knows that until it arrives, and they realize things aren't the way they're supposed to. So the timeline of everything coming together happens so quickly a lot of times on the air side. Then that's the element that starts building.
Okay. Now, obviously there's probably exceptions for, like, you know, if the pilot says to pull something off for weight-wise or whatever. But, like, let's just use the box method or the box example, right?
Right.
You just leave a box and it just happens. Well, what is, like, the next steps? Like, do you just kind of ship it as is and then just, like, you know, pay, like, a fee for leaving one behind, or?
Well, from the airline side, they've given the rate for everything. So if they make the mistake, they have to get it caught back up.
Okay.
The other side of being short, if you gave it to the airline short, then the forwarder would have to cover that cost.
Gotcha.
But if the airline makes the mistake or if the pilot says it's off, then your stuff's just delayed is what it is.
Gotcha.
And you might run into that if there's a storm. We've had recent storms through the winter.
Mm-hmm.
And so the expectation that something's going to happen gets pulled off. Well, then cargo keeps building up, and then you have massive backlog. And so the expectation is to get it out, but then there's just not enough room. So that could cause a delay. A lot of those delays, you kind of have awareness before it happens. Specifically what we're talking about is the funky little things that happen, like why is it short? They're telling me this, and now you're telling me this. And so if you understand kind of how it can happen, then you can be aware and make sure you're kind of doing your track and trace, trying to figure out where it's at.
And you can actually listen to more about that, like the backlogging and stuff like that that's happening today still on episode 25.
Look at
labeled
you. You're all over
Congestion and Traffic, I think, is the title.
That is correct by my notes here.
Oh, my goodness.
Look
I'm
at that.
so smart. And then while you're there, you can also like and comment on that video while also subscribing to the channel, so that way you can get more of these videos, right?
That's correct.
That is correct. Now, is there so how often does the shortage on cargo happen? Is this like a frequent thing that happens in the industry generally, or is it off and on?
It's off and on. I mean, there are moments when volumes get heavier. A lot of times we've seen it in years past around holiday where there's a lot of travel. So if you have a lot of travel, then you have a lot of luggage, or you have a lot of mail, or you have military if there's a lot of activity from the military side. Some of the things that are priority are obviously if somebody passes away, you have their remains that become priority. Perishables are priority. And then pharmaceutical perishable items. And
right.
Then as you go down the list, cargo is like one of the last things that has priority.
Right.
They're going to push cargo to the side and make sure your baggage gets on if the flight is full and there's a lot of baggage.
Well, drill bits only have, so much, importance compared to...
Depends on who needs them.
That is true. There's some people that probably need them on priority. But.
Well, the challenge that we see in the business is a lot of people don't understand the flow and the process. So then they get frustrated, like, where's my cargo? I paid for this and it should be there. Yes, you're correct. But unless you're paying like extreme rates that you are guaranteed to be on there,
Right.
then you're only paying to a certain point.
Right.
And if I need those bits that bad because the oil rig's down and that's the last thing that gets it back up and I'm losing $1 million an hour, then I charter a plane if they're that important.
Right.
So you have your levels of importance, but everybody thinks their stuff's like number one.
Right.
Which they should. They're paying for something, but they need to like understand what level they're paying for.
Right. Put their expectations at a level where.
Here's a great example. If we pay next day air, it's next day air, and we expect to have it next day.
Right.
However, there's things that can happen. I mean, there's just error that could happen. It could be scanned as loaded, and that guy left it off the truck.
Right.
And all day long we're waiting on our package at the house, and it doesn't show.
Right.
And then we're frustrated. We don't want to hear that, but the
Right.
reality is something like that happens.
Or really break it down to the specifics, like you said, next day air. Well, it is in the air the next day. That doesn't mean you'll be getting it at the house in the next day, like you said.
Well, the way that service is you're supposed to.
Okay.
So when you don't and you pay this rate, then you're frustrated because you paid for the need to have it.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality of things happen. So if you understand the process, then you can, at least know what's going on. The challenge is when it's really lost.
Yeah.
But when it's really lost, then you can, knowing the process, you can walk the steps back to try to figure out where it could have been misplaced.
Right.
We had a great example, real quick story from a trucking side with the storms through the majority of the U.S. for like a week and a half period caused delays because there was freight already in the funnel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they had to hold it. Well, then they get more freight and they're holding it. So the first thing that came in that didn't go is over here. Well, the next thing puts in front of it. The next thing comes in front of it. And finally, the carriers will say, no more. You cannot ship anymore because they already know how much they have.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they go to pull it out, they're pulling the most recent stuff out because the older stuff's behind it.
Right.
If they're not careful and have that awareness.
Right.
So then what's already delayed can become more delayed.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're not careful, if it has to catch multiple cities to get to where it's going to, it could become lost very quickly.
Absolutely.
So-
Absolutely. And, you mentioned about, the process of how everything kind of is done, and that's what this video is about. And that's something that, we kind of trust, and we trust the process of these videos and making sure that they have value and stuff like that, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, as we depart, I'd like to remind everybody to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Especially if it's valuable to you, right? We'll get you that next day shipping.
Exactly.
All right, we out.
We out.